Imagine you're standing in a forest right now, and you have no idea which direction home is. No phone, no GPS, no map, no road, no sign, nothing. Just trees and the sun, and maybe some distant hills. How long before you panic? 10 minutes? 5? Now imagine you're a human being 10,000 years ago. This isn't a nightmare scenario. This is Tuesday. Getting lost in the ancient world wasn't just frightening. In many cases, it was a death sentence. And yet ancient humans navigated vast territories without a single map, without GPS, without written directions of any kind. How? And what happened when it went wrong? To understand what getting lost meant 10,000 years ago, you first have to understand the world they were navigating. There were no roads, not even paths, in most cases just game trails that animals made, which looked like any other part of the forest. There were no place names, no signs, no "you are here" markers of any kind. The land wasn't divided into neat parcels. It was a continuous, featureless-seeming wilderness that stretched in every direction without obvious landmarks unless you already knew what to look for. And it was enormous. Hunter-gatherer bands covered territories of sometimes hundreds of square kilometers in their seasonal movements. Hundreds of square kilometers of forest, grassland, and river systems memorized entirely in their heads. No backup, no second copy. If you forgot or panicked or got confused, there was nothing to check. So how did they do it? How does a human being navigate hundreds of kilometers of wilderness with nothing but their own mind? The answer is 5 things, and each one is more fascinating than the last. First, the mental landscape map. Ancient humans didn't just walk through their territory, they memorized it. Every tree that looked different, every rock formation, every hill's silhouette against the sky. They built a 3-dimensional map inside their head, not with symbols, but with sensory memory. What did this place smell like? What did the ground feel like underfoot? What sounds did this valley make at night? Second, landmarks. Certain features of the landscape were given enormous weight. A distinctive mountain, a river bend that curved in a particular way, a group of trees that grew unusually close together. These weren't just pretty features, they were navigation anchors. Miss one and you drifted off course. Third, the stars. Specifically, the North Star Polaris, which sits almost perfectly above the Earth's North Pole and doesn't appear to move in the night sky. If you can find it, you know which direction is north. Ancient humans across cultures knew this star by thousands of names and considered it sacred, because it was. It was a lifeline. Fourth, water. Rivers always flow downhill toward larger rivers, toward coasts, toward human settlements. If you're lost, finding a stream and following it downstream almost always leads you somewhere. Ancient humans knew this the way we know which direction to swipe on a phone. Fifth, oral knowledge. This might be the most important one. The landscape was described in stories, myths, songs. 3 days east of the Twin Peaks, where the river makes a sound like laughing, you will find the valley. This wasn't poetry. It was a GPS encoded in narrative. Now, what actually happened if all of that failed? If you got truly, completely, unrecoverably lost? The first problem wasn't predators, it wasn't starvation, it was panic. Panic is the enemy of survival in every era, but in the ancient world it was especially deadly because once you started moving randomly, you could walk yourself deeper into the wilderness instead of out of it. The second problem was territory. The ancient world was divided informally but very seriously into tribal ranges. Walking into the wrong territory didn't just mean you were lost, it meant you were an intruder, and we already know what happened to intruders. The third problem was time. Every hour you were lost was an hour you weren't eating, drinking, or sheltering. In summer, dehydration could kill you in 3 days. In winter, exposure could kill you in hours. The fourth problem was the psychological spiral. Research on modern people who get lost in the wilderness shows a consistent pattern: denial panic, poor decisions, exhaustion, resignation. Without mental tools to interrupt that spiral, it could become fatal surprisingly fast. Ancient survival trainers, elders, experienced hunters knew all of this, and they drilled specific responses into young hunters from childhood. The first rule, taught across virtually every indigenous survival tradition: stop moving. This sounds obvious, but it's deeply counterintuitive. When you're lost and panicking, every instinct says run, move, do something. But moving randomly burns energy, takes you further from where you were, and prevents you from thinking clearly. Stop, breathe, look. The second strategy, read the sky. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, always. At noon, it's roughly south in the northern hemisphere. If you know what time of day it is by the light quality and temperature, you can orient yourself roughly with the sun alone. The third strategy, read the land. Water flows downhill. Moss tends to grow on the north-facing side of trees in the northern hemisphere. Animals create paths to water sources. A bird flying purposefully at dawn or dusk is probably heading toward water or its roost, both useful navigation clues. The fourth strategy, use the mental map. Even in unfamiliar territory, an experienced ancient hunter would start asking, "What do I remember about this area from stories? Where is the sun relative to where I expected it? Did I cross a stream? Did I go uphill or downhill?" The mental map is assembled in reverse, retracing the journey in the mind. The fifth strategy, wait for night. The stars were a compass that covered the entire sky. Find Polaris, find the Southern Cross if you are below the equator. The sky was a map that ancient humans had memorized as thoroughly as the land. Here's where the story gets personal. In 2014, 3 neuroscientists, John O'Keefe, May-Britt Moser, and Edvard Moser, won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering something extraordinary. Inside your hippocampus, a region of the brain closely associated with memory, there are cells called place cells. They fire whenever you're in a specific location. They literally track where you are in space. And surrounding them are grid cells which create a coordinate system, like internal GPS coordinates. Firing in precise geometric patterns that allow you to calculate distance and direction relative to where you've been. You have a GPS in your brain. Right now, that has been there for millions of years. But here's the thing, like any skill, it degrades if you don't use it. Studies of London taxi drivers who had to memorize the entire street layout of London before GPS existed showed dramatically enlarged hippocampi compared to non-taxi drivers. Their navigation system had been exercised so heavily it physically grew. Studies of people who rely on GPS navigation show the opposite. The hippocampus shrinks, spatial memory degrades. The ancient navigation system your ancestors used to survive wilderness the size of countries is quietly switching off. So here's what this tells us. The ancient human who got lost, really lost, deep in unknown wilderness and found their way home anyway, was not lucky. They were drawing on a system that had been trained from childhood, refined by generations of experience, encoded in stories and songs, and backed by a brain that was physically built for exactly this problem. We still have that brain, we've just handed the job to a satellite. Which is fine, mostly. But every time you put your phone down and try to navigate somewhere without GPS, every time you look up at the night sky and try to find north, every time you pay attention to which way the river is flowing, you're exercising a system that your ancestors needed to stay alive. The most sophisticated navigation technology in human history is sitting in your skull right now. It just needs to be used. If this made you curious, subscribe. There is so much more about how the ancient human mind worked and why it still matters on this channel.